Today, we are going to talk about the Barbarian. This is the weapon master with berserking, bleeding, a full arsenal of weapons from slashing, bludgeoning, piercing, all sorts of options with this character, and you're going to feel unbridled rage when you're smashing into your opponents. The Barbarian's special energy is Fury. That's this orange ball that fills up as you attack enemies. There is no passive generation of Fury, all of it requires you to constantly hit enemies, so it takes a little bit of work to get up to your full potential. So first up, we're going to look at the lunging strike skill. This is a short duration dash that ends up with a decent amount of damage as a starting attack. Definitely an awesome pickup. Enhancing that just increases the initial strike damage as well as gives it a little bit of life restore when you hit high HP targets. Whirlwind is the secondary skill that we paired with this. This is a spinning channel attack. The longer you channel it, the more damage you deal to nearby targets. It just felt fantastic and worked really well with that lunging strike to get yourself into the action before you start spinning. Enhancing that just makes it so that the damage generates more fury, so the more people you continue to hit, the longer you can spin for. If you have a bladed weapon, you can take Furious Whirlwind, which will add a bleed effect to that spin. If you're not using blades, you're pretty much stuck with Violent Whirlwind, which just increases the damage after a longer duration of spin time. Both of these skills will prioritize whichever weapon you have equipped that is the best. This combo was pretty much the most rewarding Barbarian combo that we played. It just feels really good, charging into targets and then beating them up with that massive Whirlwind. It handled both groups of enemies as well as elite fights very well. There was no real complaints with this build. If you don't really have a target to Whirlwind, it's a little bit boring just smacking them with a hammer. Now getting to bosses, this build was a little bit more boring. The lunging strike was nothing particularly interesting against the boss, and the Whirlwind just didn't really do enough damage to feel meaningful when attacking a single high HP target. It was able to clear up the minions very easily, so as these minions spawn up, we're able to just do a nice little spin, wipe them out. Minions aren't really an issue when you're using this build, but that main big health target just took a really long time to take down, and especially after 80%, when your main lunge attack stops dealing increased damage, it was rough. I would rank this build super fun, because the Whirlwind is fantastic, and the lunge attack feels very rewarding, even if it's not a great boss killer. Bash is the basic attack that prioritizes bludgeoning weapons. This will use whichever of your bludgeoning weapons is the strongest or will deal the most damage. It does a decent amount of damage, and if you hit enemies multiple times with it, you eventually stun them. Hitting those stunned enemies with Enhanced Bash will give you some Fortify, 5% of your base life per time you hit a stunned enemy. This Fortify will just reduce the damage that you take by a decent amount. We paired this with Hammer of the Ancients, which is a massive area attack that deals huge damage in a very localized spot. This one requires a two-handed bludgeoning weapon. Enhanced Hammer of the Ancients makes it so you generate a lot more fury based off how many targets you smashed with that hammer. And we really liked Furious Hammer of the Ancients, which increased the damage of the hammer based off how much fury you had built up. Due to the directionality of it, the Hammer of the Ancients is really good at clearing out packs, but you actually have to position the packs appropriately. If you don't, you're going to be killing only a couple of targets at a time. The strength of Bash compared to other single-target attacks made it very good at clearing out elite enemies. It did a lot more damage per hit than the average starting attack, and Hammer of the Ancients also works quite well on the elites. On the actual boss, this skill still felt pretty good. The average damage of Bash is rewarding, the amount of damage you're able to deal is quite high, and then when you power up those Hammer of the Ancients for some big hits, it really chunked the boss's health, as well as it was able to clear up the minions rather quickly. You get a couple of points and smash the minions away, really good at handling bosses that bring out multiple threats in it at a time. Overall, the spec was okay in funness. It doesn't feel as rewarding as Pulverize from the Bear Druid, and overall it was just kind of boring visually to play around with, so it felt not as fun as some other builds. If we were to manage to get some more attacks that did some more interesting visuals, it would increase in funness for me. I really do like the visual effects. Alright, on to the next basic attack. We're talking about Flay. This is the bleed-based attack. It deals a small amount of damage per hit, and then puts on a massive bleed over 5 seconds, which really chunks down enemies. Enhancing that with Enhanced Flay makes targets have a chance to become vulnerable, increased if using a two-handed weapon. This paired well with Rend, which is also a cleave in front of you that does wide AoE damage and bleeds all targets that you hit. This has a massive bleed for 69 damage in early game. Enhanced Rend really works well with that vulnerable from the Flay attack. It continues to extend the duration of that vulnerable on enemies, working really well against elite targets. You can tell they're going to die when their bar gets fully dark red. Enhancing Rend with Furious makes it so that the direct damage grants Fury, and you can get multiple stacks of Fury depending on how many targets you hit. Enhancing it with Violent Rend just really takes advantage of that vulnerable debuff, increasing damage dealt even more. In early game, this spec did not feel very effective. It took a long time to kill targets because you were waiting for that bleed to just tick down on them. They were already dead, you just had to wait for the bleed to last longer, and that doesn't work very well when you're trying to cleave down a lot of enemies. Against the Elite, it killed the Elite rather quickly, technically, but we were still waiting about the same amount of time for the Elite to die, waiting for that bleed to tick down, where other skills would have just had already killed it by then. Now against the boss is where this skill really shined. The amount of damage this thing was able to deal to the boss felt rewarding. Lots of percent of the boss's HP would chunk down while you were avoiding attacks. The huge amount of damage from Rend was really, really good against bosses, and while you took out the minion, the boss is still taking a significant amount of damage. I think per hit, this attack actually does more damage than any other specialization. It just doesn't feel like it does because you have to wait for that bleeding ramp up to tick down. So because of this, the specialization just kind of felt boring. There was nothing really visually rewarding when you were playing it. The boss didn't feel like it was chunking down large amounts of health. You have slowly kind of reduced down, but it just didn't give that same reward as any of the other specializations. I hear this one really ramps up in the later games, so it might be worth taking a look at once you're a higher level. Alright, on to Dual Wield. Here we're talking about Frenzy. This is where you slash into enemies, getting rapid attack speed increases as you slam into them. This attack just felt so rewarding. The rapid increases in attack just felt really good, and it felt awesome to just continually attack targets. Enhanced Frenzy just makes it so that it generates more Fury while you're getting that mega attack speed boost. It does require you to use Frenzy quite a bit, getting that build up to get huge amounts of Fury. It was sometimes hard to generate that much Fury because the targets were dying so quickly, we weren't getting that 60% attack speed. Double Swing is what we paired with this because it's the other dual wield attack, and it felt really good. The chunk of damage that enemies took as you slashed into them with that double swing just felt awesome. Enemies melted down, and it worked really well with the feeling of the rapid attacks and then a final executing double swing. It was a very rewarding playstyle. Enhanced Double Swing generates huge amounts of Fury if you hit a knockdown or stunned enemy. Now, Frenzy and Double Swing don't really knock down or stun enemies off the bat, so it didn't really feel like we could take advantage of the Enhanced Double Swing, which is a little bit unfortunate for an early game effect. I'd rather this be an effect that could easily be triggered by the other effects of this build, rather than relying on something at a higher level to take advantage of the enhanced features. Violent Double Swing makes it so that hitting with both hits of Double Swing makes the target vulnerable, which was just really great. And then Furious Double Swing, casting Double Swing while berserking grants you 2 additional seconds of berserking. That was awesome. Berserking is huge amounts of attack speed increase, and Furious Double Swing just enhances that even further. Really rewarding, really fun. This specialization really just melted everything in its path. It took out single targets, multi-targets, AoE targets. It was just really great, taking down elites in just a couple of seconds and just feeling like an absolute beast. Compared to all the other specializations, this was definitely the one that was the most rewarding from just the single basic attack. Frenzy feels better than any of the other basic attacks we've felt so far, other than maybe lunging in for a Whirlwind, but really the Whirlwind was what felt more fun with Lunge. Frenzy just feels fun itself. When getting onto the boss, Frenzy felt like you kind of had to stand there and smash into the boss, taking hits to really gain advantage of the Frenzy. But it also kind of felt like it was worth it to take those hits to really lay into the boss and just get that health bar dropping down rapidly. Frenzy struggled a little bit there with taking out the ads, and it did require a double swing or two to take out the groups of ads. They just didn't stand where you needed for them to be easily cleaved out. But the boss fight was really fast, really good, and Frenzy just continued to feel rewarding, even hitting one single target with a lot of health. So this gets the ranking of heck of a lot of fun. I would definitely recommend anybody picking up the Barbarian, trying out the dual wield specialization, at least for a little bit, to feel like you are an absolute beast of weapon mastery. Upheaval was a little bit of a lone goat here compared to the rest of the skills. It didn't really have a primary skill to go with it, but it works pretty well with any of the two-handed primary skills. Upheaval is just a massive cone in front of you that does massive damage and feels very, very good. Enhanced Upheaval just makes that massive swing have a chance to stun targets, just making it even more rewarding and even better against groups of enemies. Violent Upheaval gives you that berserking buff as long as you hit 2 enemies with it. It is just really, really great for clearing out those packs. Furious Upheaval makes dealing direct damage to an enemy with a skill that is not Upheaval cause your next Upheaval to deal 8% increased damage, stacking up to 10 times. So that's up to 80% increased damage from your next Upheaval as long as you hit them with single target attacks. Upheaval absolutely slayed. Be it single target, multi-target, anything you fought, Upheaval worked. It was really good at just melting groups of enemies. You would see a priority target, you would right-click on them, and they would disappear and no longer be a problem. Against the boss, Upheaval wasn't quite as good. Stacking up 8 stacks to be able to get that increased damage from it took a long time. We could have probably ramped it up pretty well with Frenzy, but then we're swapping between both dual wields and the two-hander, and if you have your strongest weapon being one or the other, you're kind of splitting up your build, which wasn't great. Compared to anything else, I definitely feel like Upheaval was an absolute blast, and I would recommend people try it out to just have a fun time clearing out a dungeon, and then probably switching to a different skill to fight the boss, just so the boss fight feels a little bit better. So I definitely had a lot of fun playing around with the Barbarian. I think it's a solid class that really fits into the fantasy really well. All of the skills really lined up and felt like a Weapon Master Barbarian, so that was just an awesome class. Catch us next time to talk about the Necromancer.